I'd like to welcome you guys to this week's report. It is Thursday, July 6th. Just coming off the 4th of July holiday and a weekend where a lot of guys were fishing. Prior to that, I know I saw more boats on the water on Saturday than I've seen all year. But a lot of good fishing opportunities happening out there and some not so good opportunities as well. So without further ado, let's head out to the map. Heading up to the Channel Island, there was some good sea bass fishing during that full moon we had over the weekend. I know the Mirage was on a 2-day trip with 13 guys, had 78 sea bass. It's full 2-day limits, 3 fish a person per day. Caught a couple yellows and a couple halibut up there, a bunch of rockfish, normal fill-in stuff for up there. There's some big halibut around. I know they got a 51 pounder, I think 51 pounder, maybe it's IGFA woman's 30-pound test record. They got that thing submitted, so they're still around up there. I know the fishing's been a little bit spotty outside of the sea bass, but that usually happens around the full moon anyway. But I would expect that fishing to just keep improving throughout the summer for bass, barracuda, yellowtail, halibut, all the other stuff, and then come the next lunar cycle, probably the sea bass as well. Heading down to San Clemente Island. Again, same story as it's been over there. Yellows on the front. Sport boats anchoring up. If they get good conditions, the fish are biting. If not, they're struggling, but they're doing pretty well. I saw today the Thunderbird was back on fish, and I'm sure that'll continue to bite as long as we have conditions. Not really any kind of changes going on over there other than good things with water continuing to warm and everything else. As far as bass fishing over there goes, my friend Gary Reyes and a couple of his buddies, I don't remember exactly who was on his boat with him, but they fished bass and yellows on the front side. I didn't catch any yellows. They had good bass fishing on hard baits and weedless swim baits. Gary has a company called Reyes Swim Baits. Makes a real nice product. If you guys are in the local tackle stores in the LA area, a lot of them have them. Might be worth checking out. I'm going to skip Catalina for a second because I did a trip out there on Saturday. I'm going to talk about that a little bit offshore stuff as well. But in on the coast, good bass fishing still, and more importantly, the sport boats are actually catching some barracuda now, which is a really good sign. And these aren't those, random ones that are showing up. They're actually targeting barracuda, where they're anchoring up, chumming, throwing jigs, and catching multiple fish. I saw the Victory was out there on them today, and I know the Enterprise and City of Long Beach are doing it as well. But that's a good sign. Hopefully these things stick around for a while. Give them an option to catch something other than sculpin on a half-day trip or a 3/4 day trip, and that's a good thing. Get people fishing again instead of just going out and loading up on bottom fish out there like they've been forced to do the last few years. Like I said, good bass fishing along the coast. Dave Day went up to Palos Verdes after watching the report, and he had good bass fishing. He had, a bunch of calicos up to 5.5 pounds. Said the fishing was really good up there. Glad to hear that. And any of you guys that get anything or see anything on here that helps you out, you go out and catch fish, send me a picture on Facebook or Instagram. I'm happy to share it on my videos here. Bobby Martinez and Brian Sander fished up in the Santa Monica Bay. And Sander is another bait maker. He's not selling a lot of baits these days, so he's kind of backed off it. But he came up with a new swim bait that incorporates like a blade for the tail as opposed to a boot tail. And he's been playing around with that, and he got a nice 9-pound calico on that up in the Santa Monica Bay over the weekend. So that's a really nice fish, and Bobby got some big ones too. So glad to see those fish are biting, and glad to see that the guys are catching them and the same guys who release them and don't carry them around in the bait tank all day and do stuff like that. Yeah, so like we had the holiday on Tuesday, so I didn't get a fish this week at all. I was going to fish this afternoon, but didn't work out. So I like non-holiday weeks better when I go out in the afternoon, nobody's out there. But I did fish Saturday. We went to Catalina, and then we went offshore afterwards. And Catalina was surprisingly tough considering how good the conditions looked there in the morning. We had some good calico bass fishing really shallow on crankbaits first thing. But that beach we were fishing was right on the east end of the island, and every single boat that was running around the east end to go to fish up the island or go to fish offshore just made it cut it closer. It just almost made it unfishable just due to the amount of chop that was up against the island. We're 15 feet from shore, and it was a boat in very shallow water, so you get a bunch of boat wakes in there, and it just gets kind of dangerous. So we ran up the back a bit. We found some kelp that had current on it. We caught a few calico bass on a little MC slug. Got some bites on the weedless swim bait. Water was super clear though. I mean, you could see the bottom in 30 plus feet of water. There was no wind. There was no sun. That makes for very slow fishing at Catalina. Almost impossibly slow for bass. That water gets super clear. There's no wind ripple to break up the silhouette of the bait. There's no sun shining to kind of blind the fish a little bit and just make them see a silhouette. They're very clearly looking at that bait. And you can tell that's the case because you get a lot of fish that follow and not too close either. They just swim up behind the bait, take a look, and head out, and that was it. So we kind of knew that with the overcast sticking around, no wind in the forecast, it was going to be a terribly slow day of cats. So we decided to run offshore. And I want to talk a little bit about offshore fishing in general, which there's been fish, you know, up here. And even the long range boats and stuff, they're all up at the top of the Clemente escarpment up there. And they're having good nighttime fishing, and during the day the sport boats are having plunkers, and there's guys catching a few fish on a trolling lures. I know Rob Webster on Magellan, we talked to him out there. He had one fish, I think, on a flyer, and just a fish here, a fish there. But it sounds like good fishing, but for the amount of boats that are out there, it's remarkable. But before I get into that, I want to talk about kind of our theories. So, knowing that there was fish associated with the 500 fathom curve on the front side of Clemente, that's basically where the island comes up from the base of the seafloor. And that's always, you know, I talk about that thumb over the hose thing. That's the deepest version of that. And because there had been fish on the front side of Clemente along that curve, it would make sense that there are fish on the backside of Catalina on that same curve. And I only know that because in past years when they've been on the front of Catalina or Clemente, they've been on the back of Cat. Not always, but pretty good chance. So we ran out to that fathom curve there, 500 fathom curve where it drops off, a few miles off the island. And we went from, started about Salter Birdie, and then we ran down it maybe 2 or 3 miles, and there was just no life, no birds, no bait, no sign of anything. I mean, just dead sterile water. So at that point, we decided to run across to basically on a line to the west end of Clemente, and then try and look between the west end of Clemente and the top of the escarpment there, which is, you know, a few miles, 10 miles or so, I would imagine, or maybe more. Knowing that that fleet was going to be our upper boundary because we want to fish around them. So as we're crossing, regardless, you know, I call that no man's land out there because it's very featureless. There's nothing in between the islands except flat bottom. And the chances of finding tuna out there is really needle in a haystack kind of thing. So what you do is you kind of rely on what you're seeing with birds or dolphins or whales to try and steer you in an area that might have fish. And once we get in an area where we start seeing anything, we stop and glass constantly. Glass 360 around the boat because there's not any one particular thing to look for. While we were glassing, I saw a fish jump that I thought could have been a dolphin, could have been a tuna. Never sat there for a few minutes, never saw a dolphin, so obviously a tuna. Wasn't a mola. And so we kind of kept going in the same direction where we were headed towards Clemente, and then as we're going, we had a little spot of, you know, 30, 40 pound bluefin pop up. They popped up so fast that by the time I saw them and turned the boat towards them, we were, you know, 100 yards away. They were already down by the time we got there. Checked out that area for a little bit. Didn't see anything. So at this point, we have, you know, we're 8 miles off the front side of Clemente. We can either go down towards the mackerel bank or go up towards the escarpment. We decided to go up towards the escarpment. As we're running up there, there's no place that I did not see boats trolling madbacks in the distance somewhere. And they're trolling these madbacks in what we call no man's land. So you got to think about the sense of that. So they're not relating to they're not fishing a fathom curve, they're not fishing a place where there's bait fish, they're not fishing a place where there's birds or signs of life or whales or dolphins. They are just trolling in an open, flat expanse that probably covers, I don't know, what's 25 times 20, a couple hundred square miles if you look at the distance between the islands and the length of the islands. Trying to troll through that zone is the worst thing you could possibly do. You're running at a very inefficient pace. You're not covering water effectively. You're trolling in the lowest percentage area you can. And that's I'll talk more about that, but you know, that's just something to keep in mind. If you're going to troll a Mad Mac, you don't want to troll it in the middle of nowhere, or anything for that matter. So as we're running up the escarpment, we're not seeing anything. No birds, no nothing. I mean, we saw more whales than we saw terns the entire trip. It's just devoid. And then we got to the upper end of things where we got to maybe a mile below the fleet and saw, you know, you could glass them from there. And there's sport boats drifting with 1 or 2 fish hanging. Bunch of guys trolling Mad Macs in circles around them. Bunch of guys flying kites, dragging spreader bars, all this stuff. And then, you know, we're a mile from the bottom of it, and the top end of that fleet is 5 miles away. And it's just all the boats in that area, no one catching anything, no birds up, no signs of life. That's okay for the sport boats who have sonars, and that ended up being a very down day for the fleet, by the way. I know a lot of the boats that were up there didn't catch anything. But, so rather than go any further, obviously, we decided to turn back and run an angle towards the Cat Canyon above the Farnsworth Bank at Cat. I think we're 26 miles above the east end of Cat and out, you know, past Clemente, above Clemente. And, you know, you can see Santa Barbara Island and San Nick in the distance. It's pretty far for guys on a skip. So we decided we're going to start running back that way. So we're running back, but we're running back at, you know, 18, 20 knots and both looking while we're running. And we're not hauling ass, we're not listening to the radio or having a beer or whatever, we're just watching. And come over a swell, and there's a big breeze for a bluefin right there. Pull the boat out of gear. I mean, I was almost right on top of him. I actually slid so close to him that I had to stop the boat and let him get ahead of me. They didn't really disturb the fish. They were, you know, just breathing on the surface. So what'll happen in those situations, if I find breezers and I'm coming up from behind them, I'll drive wide of them and get up ahead of them. You have to go pretty fast sometimes, because those breezers do move pretty quickly. And as I made that turn, I saw some Mad Mac guy that was trolling up towards the fleet about a half mile away, see me turn and make a cast, and now this guy's hauling butt right at us. And so by that first time I didn't get the proper angle because he kind of swerved off. Now I'm going to try and line up the third time. I can actually see the fish at the front of the thing flashing and shining like they're going to bite. As I'm trying to run over there, now this Mad Mac guy is running right at my bow, and I actually had to put my boat between him and the breezer to keep him from running the whole thing over. And what ended up happening with that is we got one more cast on those fish, and then they sank out. We had them under the boat going by for a while. It was a big school. And this Mad Mac guy just decided to start trolling in circles that are very tight circles. They thought maybe somebody had fallen from the wheel, you know, like when the boat's going free on its own in the middle of nowhere. And at that point, we just left that area. Never saw another fish on the way back. What I will say is that there is not a lot of fish up here in U.S. waters. This is a very different year than the last few years. The last few years, you could drive into a lot of different places and find fish, or at least bait and life. There's a lot of very big patches of completely empty water right now. And you know, we saw 3 spots of fish and probably drove 130 miles round trip. So that just gives you an idea. You know, if you're gonna go, I'd go down south. But so let me talk about this, you know, this Mad Mac trolling for a second. I saw enough of it through the binoculars and watching people this week. You know, just because you stop your boat and put a Mad Mac out does not automatically mean that tuna will appear out of nowhere and start biting. So I think about this boat that tried to chop us up. As we were driving away, looking slowly to see if anything else popped up, that guy spent the next half an hour driving in circles. So how many circles do you have to drive in before you realize that there's no tuna here, they're going to bite your Mad Mac? And why are you wasting your time doing it? And why are you wasting your time driving in a circle around a sport boat or a boat that's hooked up? You need to find some fish that are out on their own, and you need to lead them, and you need to bring your lure in front of those fish without running over the fish or driving right through them or things like that. You know, and Jimmy always jokes that the Mad Max ruined tuna fishing, and while we don't fish them, I can honestly tell you, as far as I'm concerned, it has, not just for me, but for anybody that knows what they're doing and wants to approach the fish right. To have somebody run through at 15 knots is really problematic. And there's no problem with people fishing Mad Max, if you're a Mad Max fisherman, that's fine. But what you need to consider is what's happening to the other anglers. There have been plenty of times over the last few years where there'll be 4 or 5 different boats working a spot of fish. But if everybody's fishing it properly by either fishing a flying fish or casting poppers to them or things like that, driving around slowly, that's fine. But all it takes is one Mad Max guy driving through at 15 knots right through the middle of everything, and then now nobody's catching it. So just something to keep in mind. You know, if you want to roll a Mad Max, have some courtesy around other boats. Your chances aren't very good at catching them when you're driving through the middle of the fleet. Also, try and put your Mad Max in where you might see some fish, where there are some fish already there where they might bite. Look for birds, look for bait on the surface, look for meter marks, look for whales and dolphins and things like that feeding that show something's happening. If you want to troll your Mad Max and there's an area that does not have any signs of life, do it on the edge of a bank, or do it on the fathom curve, or do it on the end of the Clemente escarpment, or any of those Clemente ridge across the bank very systematically. Do not just put them in and troll for 10 hours. You're not going to catch anything, or your chances of catching anything are very slim. So that's the end of my sermon here today, but just wanted to share some information about what I saw. That also being said, I'm not going to fish tuna here in U.S. waters again on a weekend, first of all, and second of all, until some more fish push up, because the limited amount of fish really aggregates everybody in the spots where they're not really biting all that well, and also they're not really biting lures good. You know, you're better off fly lining a sardine these days than you are casting into a foamer. But head down to San Diego. You know, the boats down there are doing pretty well as well. They're still getting some nice bluefin down there, mostly at night, and the sport boats are having some really good scores on bluefin. Some guys getting limits, some guys getting mixed bags of, you know, yellowfin and bluefin. That's all 30 to 40 pound stuff. Look like they're a little smaller. Flatline sardines, little Colt Sniper type jigs. I saw one on that, AFCO makes that little hybrid jig now. They caught one on that on one of the boats the other day. Yeah, it's flyline fishing, it's sport boat fishing. If you're a private boater, take a tank of sardines with you if you want to do it. Mark some fish, look for an area that's got some signs of fish, start chumming and start flylining baits. That's your best bet. The 4-pack boats are doing it all the time. You don't need a huge bait capacity. But like with the fish up north, your best bet is to have some fish to yourself. Finally, boats are fishing out at the Tanner and Cortez banks. I know the Freedom was out there the other day, had a good score of yellowtail. Not seeing a lot of tuna out there, but I think that as we get into the later summer, those fish should slide up the back of those fish that are in Mexican waters now will probably slide up into U.S. waters across the Clemente Ridge, line up the backside east end of Clemente for a while, and then make their way out to the Tanner and Cortez if anything holds true. So there's always an opportunity if you got a little bit bigger boat and you want to get away from the crowd, it might be a good place to look. That's about it for this week, guys. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you catch some fish when you get out.